Welcome, welcome everybody to our second to last Community Safety Review Committee meeting. And to the committee members, Bob just let me know that I made an error in the email and sent you the wrong agenda. So I'm glad you all got here anyways. Also, I'm also noticing on the actual agenda, the date is 12/23/21. So, but here we are still in 2020 for a little bit longer. So again, glad you all made it despite a couple of errors. Happy to have you here and looking forward to our meeting tonight where we're gonna get into some really good content, I think. But let's cruise through so we can get there. I'll start introductions. I'm Emily, use she, her pronouns, and I am a person with white skin with a white background and some blue curtains, a gray sweater, and long hair. And I'll pass.
I'm Shay Witzberger. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm a fat white person with brown hair tied back and a pencil sticking out of my bun in a room that's blue with empty shelving.
I can go next. My name is Lana Dever. I go by she, her pronouns. And today I am a disembodied voice and enjoying it.
Hey folks, sorry, I was here and then accidentally turned my whole computer off, but I'm back. This is Kaz DeWolf, they, them, or he, him pronouns. I'm a disheveled white guy with a gray and white hat in a bedroom. Check.
I'm Kelsey Rice, white lady, hiding in my bedroom doing the single mom dance with frozen pizzas and TV, and hopefully they don't turn on each other, but it should be fine, and I'm happy to be here.
My name's Maya. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm living it up on a Wednesday night with the wine, as Lana pointed out, and half of a other person friend here. This is Josh.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, folks. This is Drift Maven. I use they, them pronouns. Actually, I love fair pronouns, and I've never said it in a public forum because the world can't seem to honor that. So fair or they, them. Yay, I said it. I'm on the phone because I can't handle video after Zooming at work all the time. So good to see you all.
Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks for showing up, Drift.
I'm Laura Stamus. I use she, her pronouns. I have white skin and brown hair, and there are some doors behind me and some earrings over here hanging on the wall.
I'm Annalise Griffin. I use she, her pronouns. I have on a hat and a white and gray sweater, and I have a white background.
Great.
I'm Bob Ozer. Use he, him pronouns, and I'm on the phone and on the video. So there.
Did we capture everybody, I think? Great. All righty. So let's do a brief grounding practice. And you're welcome to keep your video on or off. This time, let's actually add a little bit of movement in if you'd like. So as always, you're welcome to join the grounding practice or not. It's up to you. But if you're seated in whatever position you're in, just take a moment to connect with the floor. And that might be because your feet are directly on the floor. It might be through a bed or a chair or another surface that maybe you're not touching the floor, but the chair or bed that you're on is touching the floor. So just feel that groundedness, that connection. And then you can go ahead and feel a little bit of a lift in the upper body if you'd like, maybe even straightening your back a little bit. With that grounded downward energy in the feet and hips and bottom half of the body, you can maybe begin to lift up towards the sky. And if you'd like, you can bring your arms all the way up and just stretch as tall as you can. If you'd like to lean over from one side to the other, you can do that as well. Feeling at the same time the grounded energy, the downward energy of the bottom half of the body, and the lifted upward energy of the top half of the body. Strengthening our ability to experience two different experiences at the same time, or multiple things at the same time. Taking a nice deep breath, getting any stretch you'd like here before rejoining the group. And then when you're ready, you can let go of the practice and come back to the group. And a brief check-in. Laura, are you willing to take notes in today's meeting?
Yep, sounds good.
Thank you so much. And we'll make our way through the agreements. I'm going to pin Christine's video, share my screen so that we can cruise. Would anyone like to share this first chunk of agreements?
I can do it if no one else wants to.
Thanks, Lana.
Yeah, no problem. In the process of doing work within the Community Safety Review Committee, we will aim to be curious, acknowledge that we come from different places and different life experiences, center anti-racism as foundational in this process, center anti-oppression, including work to avoid and end racism, sexism, transphobia, and homophobia, ableism, saneism, and all forms of oppression. Sanist oppression can look like pathologizing language, outing people's psychiatric labels, or engaging with people discriminatorily due to their psychiatric labeling or disability. Be kind whenever possible and use respectful language. Use both and thinking instead of either or thinking whenever possible.
Thanks, Lana. Anyone feel like reading the second batch?
I can do it.
Great.
Use whoa, ouch, oops to pause, acknowledge hurt, and take responsibility. Acknowledge or apologize when we hurt each other, even if we didn't intend harm. Hold space for probable good intentions while acknowledging that intention and impact both do matter. Welcome feedback and accountability from one another enthusiastically and give it generously. Acknowledge the contradictions.
Thank you, Annalise. And the last batch, who feels up for it?
I can do the last batch. Hold a larger vision of big intergenerational world-changing work and honor realistically the short time frame and limited scope of this one effort inside of that long arc. Be generous and reverent of people's lived experiences, especially stigmatized experiences like incarceration, arrest, poverty, homelessness, abuse, and addiction. Check our biases individually and together. Work to attune to safety, value the quality of our human experiences together, and aim to make things safer, while acknowledging that safety looks different for each person and is never guaranteed. Make change in our community through both the process and the production of outcomes. Hold responsibility of confidentiality with reverence and respect-informed consent in how information shared is used.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, and before we move on to our one agenda item here tonight, we've gotten better at recognizing how much we can accomplish in one meeting. I just want to
Huge.
It is a huge agenda item. It's true.
I was gonna say, it's a huge.
It is. I just want to say that I made a mistake in something I reported in our last meeting. And so I'd just like to correct myself now, which is that when we were discussing the use of force data, I made a comment that the department considers handcuffing, that the department captures handcuffs in hand control as use of force. And the clarification to that information is that it is not true that the department considers or captures data on every time handcuffs are used, but when non-compliant handcuffing happens is when it's considered as use of force. So all people arrested, with rare exceptions, are handcuffed, and the vast majority in a compliant manner. In such cases, no use of force is reported. And then also I've gotten a little bit of clarity on some questions about what head displacement and hand control is. So I'll share that now as well. Hand control means any non-impact use of empty hands, such as grabbing an arm, pulling, holds, takedowns, and similar techniques. I recognize that the information I'm sharing is challenging and intense. And I should have said that before I shared it. I apologize for that. Head displacement is a grappling technique used to control a person's body to overcome resistance. In such cases, an officer and subject are usually in very close proximity. The head is grasped and supported and then pressured laterally and or downward to off-balance the subject. It is commonly used as in a takedown. It can also be used as described in the meeting to deal with someone trying to bite or spit on the officer. Avoidance of neck throat are explicitly part of the training in this technique. So I just wanted to share that information with you all for our discussion last week or 2 days ago. So for today's meeting, we have Kaz is sharing in the chat a resource.
All right, yeah, I meant to send it later. I was going to just get it sort of on deck here to send, and I didn't realize it was going to send right away. So.
No problem. Maybe if you'd like to reference it later, or do you want to reference it now?
It's just a poster about like reformist reforms versus abolitionist steps, or like attrition in policing is, and I thought it was really fascinating and useful, and so I wanted to share. And yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you kicked us off because we are about to have a file to share, which is that Shay and I have been working tirelessly over the last 48 hours or however long since we met last, so that we can share with you a document, a draft document of our key findings and the beginnings of the recommendations. So very likely nothing in there will be brand new. We've been talking a lot about these findings, but we did want to share with you in writing some of what is in the draft form of the report. It's not really possible to share the whole thing because of its size and to use our time well, right? But what we would like to do is share, link in the chat, a Google Doc, which is a draft of our key findings and recommendations. And that way everybody will be able to open it. We'll take a few minutes so that we can read it and then open discussion. And we can do that in a couple of ways that we can talk about. But I think we also want to note that this is really draft, right? And so we're bringing it to you in its draft format. And as far as the recommendations go, you know, this is what we're discussing tonight, you know, so just because it's written in the document, you know, yeah, go ahead, Shay.
I want to also share that it's not a draft of a standalone document that's going to exist necessarily. It's a draft of a piece of the report. That's the 10-page summary. So it's still long, but it's a 10-page nugget of the report that says, here are some of the biggest takeaways of both sides of this analysis. And here are some recommendations that attach to each of those kind of areas. And before we get started, I want to name that it that the piece about the findings is up for discussion, but we found a lot of those things. So we can talk about how they're presented, and we can talk about what else is needed to share in there if we want to, but that's really, it's not in its final form necessarily, but that's the analysis. The part that we have more space to discuss right now is recommendations. Emily and I have put a lot of recommendations on this paper so that we could have a multitude of options to talk about and choose from. We are not married to each one of them being in the final thing if there's significant dissent amongst this body, but they align with our analysis generally. There are lots of options for how to achieve some of these kind of larger goals. So I'm just going to say before we share the document that there's 4 general areas of recommendation that we're considering. One is acknowledging the harm that's happening and has happened in some of these systems. 2, increase accountability. 3, help people meet their basic needs and build up alternatives. And 4, remove policing from targeted areas first. Remove policing from maybe most harmful contexts or in the ways that might be the most agreed upon within the community. They're connected to each other, but those are the areas. And some of this stuff is hard to imagine sometimes because we're talking about potentially shifting over a long period of time to a new way of caring for each other in community. And people have feelings about that, and that's only to be expected. And I want us to really stay grounded in the findings that we found that there is harm occurring in some of these systems, and that we really want to shift that. The document that Kaz shared, I have seen, I'm familiar with, and that document essentially lines up 2 common schools of thought around police reform that are floating around in the world today. The first school is that we can make smaller reforms that keep the size of the prison industrial complex steady or growing and make change in that way. The second school of reform is that we actually must reduce the size of that industrial complex in each of our smaller reforms in order to make long-term change. So there are options that are available to our community in both of those fields that have been asked for by many people, I just want to say. And we can talk a little bit more about how the specific recommendations that we have proposed might fit into those schemas. But things like, well, we'll just get into it, but that's some context for what we're about to do. And again, we're not saying this is how it has to be. This is the discussion about what are your feelings when you sit with some of this new information. So without further ado, I release the doc.
So to follow up on what Shay is saying, Shay just put a link to a Google document in the chat. Everybody who's in the meeting, public included, is welcome to open the document and read it. It is not editable, I believe. So what we are going to do in our conversation is decide how we want to digest the document and then have discussion about the content of the document, primarily focused on the recommendations. Right. It is a 9-page document.
So one suggestion is to maybe just take a look at the headers, all the headers first, and then go in from there. But Emily and I have wondered if you might want 10 minutes to read amongst yourselves and then discuss, or 5 minutes, or however many minutes you feel like you need. How do folks feel about a few-minute reading break?
Yeah, that works. I wonder if while we do that, would you be able to share your screen and put the doc up for folks who can't open it?
Yes. Yep.
Or at least, part of it. I mean, I think that might be hard now that
Yeah, it is 9 pages. It's going to be hard to review. Gary just asked in the chat to email it. I will definitely email it to you, Gary. And if anybody else needs that and for some reason can't access the link, I can do that.
Potentially to the phone folks who would include Drift.
Yep, absolutely. Drift, I will email it to you as well.
Yeah,
and for
I can open it. I can open it, but if you email it, that would be great too.
Yep. Bob, you would like it emailed as well? Or you just saying aye?
So I guess my question should have been asked earlier. So you're sharing a document, but you're not sharing the analysis that goes before the recommendation. You're sharing the recommendation piece, right?
Yeah, we are. So as you look at the document, there's key findings, which is summary, but you'll see there's a lot of detail in there. So the headers are the summary of the key findings, and then the bullet points are some more detail about those headers, right? And then there's some recommendations. But there's a lot of content that will be in report that we're not sharing with you all now because it's not done in terms of just the formatting and getting it in report format. And also it is going to be very long and it's not going to be digestible in this committee format.
But we'll need to approve a document on the 28th that we haven't seen.
Can you say that again?
If you're able, go ahead.
We'll need to approve a document on the 28th that we haven't seen.
Yeah, I think Bob's wondering, and I'm wondering too, when will we be able to see the full document?
Yeah.
Emily and I have shared from the jump that we are going to hold the writing of the entire report as our responsibility. That's not going to be approved by the committee. You aren't going to have a chance to go line by line through the report and make approvals or not. We've shared the key themes, we're sharing the key findings, and we're sharing the recommendations with the hope that you will get a chance to sit with the recommendations and make your recommendations to us about them in this meeting. I think if you're able to just to stick with this and read the document and we can discuss the process after, it might be helpful, as we have a tendency in this group to talk a lot of theory at the beginning and not necessarily get to the stuff that needs to be gotten to. So I wonder if it will help illuminate what is going on for us to read the document and then to join together 5 minutes for convo.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think if we usually do a break in our meetings, so what if we just do a break now and read it?
Great.
Okay. Off I go.
So we'll come back together. I'll check in 10 minutes, which is at 6:39, and we'll just see, we'll start the conversation there. It might take folks a little longer to digest the whole thing, which is totally fine. But we'll give some quiet time for reading. All righty, so let's take a moment to check back in. Were folks able to get through the document reading it?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I was able to, I feel like I need a little bit more time to really read it. However, even just with a cursory read, I'm impressed and I am on board. I think you guys made some really solid recommendations, and I think that the data supports those recommendations.
Yeah, I got like 95%
There's a lot
of the way through that. Sorry.
Obviously, there's a lot more information that backs up the findings, right? That's the part that's challenging. And I feel like we've shared the themes of that listening quite a lot. What I can't share with you until it's quite finalized is it's this real experience that people's direct quotes and experiences that back a lot of the findings up. And that's that work of leaning and formatting into the final thing itself. But the general analysis is relatively stable, I would say, at this point. There's not going to be a lot of new information that's going to come in from here on out. We've continued to be open to adding information in until the last minute, up until about now. And now we really need to hold what we have, and we're at the end now. And yeah, and the recommendations, as I said earlier, hopefully are enough options for us, and they don't all have to stay necessarily, but those are options for you all to consider, that we think are relatively cohesive. There are some other types of recommendations that could be made, but I think it makes more sense right now to just hear how they are landing for you all, and if you have any reflections about the recommendations that you see, and that can inform this space. Is Emily and I are creating this work, and you all are holding us accountable and giving us direction, and have done that very well and consistently the whole time. And so my hope is that you all can continue that excellent work right now and let us know how those recommendations generally are landing. If you have questions about anything or concerns, if there's another type of recommendation that you were hoping to see that you don't, etc.
Bob, yeah.
Yeah. So I really can't say anything, I think, at this point, because I'm unfortunately a very slow reader.
It was South Africa.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I'd unmuted myself. I apologize.
Okay. No problem. I said I don't think I can really say anything at this point, because I'm a very slow reader. I think I got through maybe 2 pages, or at most 2 pages. I had to reread several of the paragraphs several times, because it seemed that there were a lot of words in them, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe a third reading would give me an idea on that. It seemed like I really thought that you did excellent work on a footnote, on number 2 footnote, to find that information and to cite it. And I would kind of wish that that the information that came out of the research that was embodied in that footnote was somehow fluid throughout the report. That seemed to be a bright spot that was more apparent than not. I guess I would have a caution in terms of how you think the report may be perceived or accepted by folks when someone else reads it. So I think that an exercise of trying to read this report as if you were someone else might give a different perspective. Everything that I'm saying here is extremely tentative, because I did not have a chance to read it with any kind of depth. I do have some comments, and I would like to make them, but I'm almost at this point hesitant to do so, because I haven't gotten through the full report.
That's very valid, and I think perhaps we can have some further discussion about these at our next meeting, which is just a couple of days before the whole thing will be done. But I definitely think that there's space in that next meeting for us to particularly subtract anything that's really not sitting well with the committee, right? So I would love to extend that digestion time for you all a little bit.
Yeah. So what I just want to throw out there again and sort of bring our focus back as we think about how we're digesting this information, that what brought us to this table, what brought us to this committee, and who this is for. And I think that's important as Bob, your comment about reading it as if you were someone else. I mean, I want you to read it as if you were George Floyd. I want you to read it as if you were Trayvon Martin's mother. I don't think it's important or necessary to read it as if I was a member of the Brattleboro Police Department, or as if I was a member of a community that never experienced police violence. So I'll leave that there, but I really want to be clear about why we're here today, why we're in this moment.
Yeah, thanks for naming that, Lana. Thanks for calling that in. Yeah, and I agree with Shay. You know, I really do. I will personally say I wish we could have gotten this to you earlier. The reality is that the scale of this process and the evolution and emergence of it has brought us to this moment. So we have, you know, you have a few days, and unfortunately some holidays for some, but we have a few days before our next meeting where hopefully folks can digest it a little bit better, and we'll be able to discuss more then as well. Yeah.
It's both, can I say, the scale and type of project, and also the structure of town meeting, public meeting, that we can't just email you all anything anytime that we want and it's done. We actually have to share everything that we share with you with the entire world earlier than a meeting or in a form like this. So that's a challenge of this type of organizing, frankly. And there may be opportunities in the next phase of the work of addressing these systemic issues in our community that happen in different formats that will allow for more speed and agility than slowness and kind of caution. But this is where we're at right now. I see hands, so I want to hold them. And I don't know if you all saw who was first, Kelsey or Laura, but
Laura was first.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I really focused on recommendations and just had like a couple questions in each part. And the first part with acknowledge the harm caused. I'm wondering if, like, when I read that, I'm wondering the publicly acknowledge and accept, like, is the intention for some of the places that you name, like police, DCF, retreat, to like write a letter publicly, or is it more like the select board? Like, I'm wondering what the intention of who is acknowledging the harm. And do you want me to ask all my questions or just one at a time? Because I think I have like 3.
If it's okay with everybody else, Laura, I really like that your first question, and I think it's an important part of the process, and I think it deserves a discussion.
Okay.
I was thinking about the truth and reconciliation process in South Africa, and I agree that nothing can move forward unless that piece is addressed really well.
Yeah, and
I'm wondering, I think Laura is saying, and I'm wondering too, what are we suggesting that should look like in like a real tangible way here in Brattleboro? Right. What are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question for this body to discuss. You know, what could that look like? What might that look like? Yeah. And if folks have thoughts on that.
Part of the work here is also it's challenging because we want to, I'm going to try my video and see if it works. My internet connection is pretty bad. Part of the challenge of this work is that not everything in the world is our responsibility. And that's, thank goodness. And also it's hard. Part of the balance of recommendations that I think is really challenging is how to find the sweet spot between being extremely prescriptive about every detail and requiring things that are clear enough, asking for things that are clear enough that we know what they mean. I'm interested in handing over quite a bit of responsibility from the seat that I'm sitting in right now for other people to actually have to grapple with what some of this looks like. Simultaneously, if things are just unclear, that's not helpful at all for anyone, right? I think if we spoon feed every part of change to the world is not actually having to work for change. And also, if we're like, everyone just apologize or say whatever, that's not like going to be helpful at all. So
I have a suggestion.
And about that. Our mandate is to give recommendations to the select board. However, we also looked at systems that are outside of the select board and have suggested a few changes about them as well, especially in the findings. Like, there needs to be more accountability around the retreat. That's a finding. We aren't tasked with asking the retreat to do that. I hope that that can be used by someone in that system to do that. But we're not going to put that as a recommendation for the select board because they don't really have responsibility for that. That's a finding, but it's not a recommendation.
I have a recommendation in the realm of accountability processes, however you want to say that. I would put it to the committee that a suggestion could be that the town pay community liaisons to hold those reconciliation and accountability meetings. So the Root, I think there's a few other organizations that could be paid to do that, and that could be a recommendation. I think it's important to think about where the town puts its money, and not having groups of marginalized groups doing that work for free.
The Community Justice Center, there was a Vista last year that it wasn't quite like that. It wasn't, it was more of like community listening sessions. And she like took it upon herself as like her major project. But I think that there is a framework there for that kind of thing, which like, I've been thinking a lot about the construct of the piece in terms of like, yes, it's a service, a body that our government pays for, our town government, but it's also something that is socially constructed. And it's something that we construct as citizens of Brattleboro by participating in it and by calling it. And it feels to me, as a white person who is extremely skeptical of the police, but in an intellectual way and not a way that exists in my body, that I didn't experience until listening so much for the past few months. It really shocked me, like I've written about this, like I've researched this, I've reported this as a journalist, but I've never, this process affected me in a way that like I didn't realize I needed to have happen. And I feel like so many people probably share that. And like, is this outside of the realm of the kind of recommendation we can have the select board do, that we can make? Maybe it is outside the purview of like what a town can do, but I don't feel like it should be. Like, it feels like having a sort of organized way of not just like saying, let's hit these budget line items, but also like, let's educate ourselves as a community and change the construct as a community feels important. And I think that's getting at like, who apologizes? How do we accept responsibility? How do we acknowledge this? How do we like accept responsibility as people who are not affected in the same way as BIPOC communities, as queer communities? So that feels like something that we should maybe spell out if people agree with what I'm rambling about more clearly. And I think it dovetails with what Laura said.
I want to keep us on stack because I saw that Kelsey's had a hand. And I think if you're able to use the hand raise function to speak in this conversation, it's going to be really helpful. There's so much to talk about. I think we could all jump in, but let's go to Kelsey and then keep going.
I know Laura said she had a couple other questions.
I think it's better to put them on pause because a lot of my questions were actually addressed in what Shay said about like the fine line between like what you recommend. So I think I can put them on hold, Kelsey, and hear what your question.
Okay, and I think maybe mine are more comments, and for once might not be super time consuming. So there's so much to absorb in what we just received, and I think I understand why, we're just getting that now, and why you can't sort of give us the analysis with it to sort of, support that. I understand why. But without that, it's hard for me to take it in and like just sort of think about, as Bob said, how it's going to be received. Although I hear what you're saying, like, we really just want to think about the voices being heard and centered. I am thinking about how it will be received, because obviously the hope is that at least some of this is going to be applied, right? And so I guess I'm just saying that, it's hard for me to absorb all of it. And I think we're going to have a lot of hopefully worthwhile conversation tonight and Monday night. But I think realistically, kind of the work has been done by you two facilitators, and our dialogue, while it's really great and fruitful, I get a sense that kind of like the work is done, and we're not really going to be altering it too much at this point. And my last bit is, and I know I'm going to get some pushback on this, is I'm not going to try to dive too deep into areas that I simply don't have enough information about, and I'm not a BIPOC, member of that community. And so without having that in my body and not having access to all the information, I don't feel comfortable speaking to it. So I'm not going to. But thinking about the training piece, that line, I think, and I've been this really clear, that I recognize needing to make changes and pull back in some areas. But the reality is, at least now and for a time, for however long, we do need policing. And my lived experience and in my body tells me that we need some major reform in what training looks like. And I think we're at a really pivotal point right now where we as people have the attention of law enforcement, and sort of there's like this reckoning happening, right? And what I'm hearing from the Brattleboro PD is that they're open to doing this differently, recognizing they're needing it. So even if we're looking at adjusting what their work looks like, pulling back in some areas, the work is still going to be there. And my lived experience tells me they need to expand and evolve. And I'm excited to hear about the ideas and prospects of what that training is going to look like going forward. So again, I know a lot of you will disagree with me, but I do feel strongly about that.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. I'd like to take a moment just to respond to a couple of things you said, if that's okay with you. Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and the concern about the lack of the committee's ability to see the data behind the findings and recommendations, and we have been trying to share that information throughout, right? And I think we've learned a lot about different ways that we could have done that differently in terms of sharing, or the time frame which we got from each step to the next, right, happened so quickly that the ability to analyze and then share back that data was just squeezed every step of the way, right? And I know you know that. I do though want to say that, as we've learned about these 2-hour meetings and how we can most effectively use our time, we're sharing this with you so that you can review the bulk of the work, right, that we've all done, and also definitely to inform the recommendations. And I think your point about the training is a good one. And I want, this is a place where your voices are heard and your guidance is really desired and valued. Here's the thing about the training, and I think it's in there to some degree in that that line there. The concern, I think this is an important dialogue, and it's a discussion we're at kind of, nationally, right? In terms of, I think one big concern about the training piece is that it increases resources to the police department, right? And there's a lack of accountability around how those resources then get used. But a bigger concern for me, to be honest, is the department's receptivity and readiness for the training, right? So to provide the training is one thing, to provide the resources for the training, to provide the training itself, and for even there to be more attunement and community participation and impacted people's involvement in the training is another thing. And all of that can happen. And still the research shows that unless an individual being trained is ready and willing and open, and committed, not just to receiving the information and integrating it, but then changing their practice based on the information that's integrated, that we have to ask ourselves, was that a valuable reuse of resources, right? And that's my concern. And we did not find, we did not find that readiness, that the department's at that level of readiness. It may be for some content areas, right? And the 48% increase that's being proposed is really around DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and implicit bias training. And we did not find that level of readiness that would require to actually reduce bias. And that's, again, about a cultural sort of consciousness or commitment to not just getting the training and hearing the training, but then integrating it in a way where there's a commitment to reduce bias, right, in the action. And so I think this is a real challenge that we're facing, right? Like, we need, as long as these officers are on the street, we need them to be better trained in the situations that they're handling and responding to. And I believe there needs to be a deeper assessment of their readiness for and receptivity to certain trainings, if in fact we're going to invest as a community in those trainings. And it's not just, again, it's not just the receptivity and readiness for the training itself, but for putting that into the accountability around putting that into practice, and therefore bias being actually reduced, right?
Which might mean that it's an order of operations thing. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Right. I guess just to follow up, I hear you, and where we are, we're talking about a cultural shift of paradigm, and looking at that needs to, be leadership that's actually on board with that shift and ready to acknowledge that the bias is there, and talking about really big things. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I just want to believe that there are enough people that want change. And, and there's enough pressure to hopefully get some buy-in. And within that, that's how change has to happen. But I'll let other people speak.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kelsey, for your perspective. Mm-hmm. Maya or Annalise, I'm not sure who's next.
Yeah, I can ask my question. It's kind of like a question with a lot of Sorry? Okay. With like a lot of underlying like pieces as well. So I was a little surprised to see the suggestion. Oh, somebody should maybe mute their phone. Yes, thank you. Okay, I was surprised to see the suggestion that the police social work liaison be eliminated. I guess just because that is kind of like the suggestion that's been made by a lot of folks in the movement to reduce police contact is like, let's have social workers do some of that contact instead. And at the same time, like I can absolutely hold the piece around, like when social workers are embedded in a police department, like they're going to be fulfilling police objectives. And that is not necessarily what, we want in our community. At the same time, that funding doesn't come from the town of Brattleboro. So that's like a person who is, I guess, theoretically trying to help people connect to resources through the police department. And it's like not something that Brattleboro pays for. So I guess I'm just curious to get a little more. I know you can't necessarily like say what people have told you exactly, but if we could get a little more context to that one, I'm just curious about it.
Sure. I can start. So again, I think, there's two things that I want to say about that also talk to some of the other pieces. One is that, generally speaking, not about this program, but just generally, the things that we're hearing about people, especially who are having experiences that are police involved and mental health system involved, are that the police social worker is not responding alone to things that reduce police contact with folks at all. That program is not yet reducing the contact between policing and people who are disproportionately harmed by policing. So that's kind of one piece just generally in the world about embedded social work that we get to have a conversation about in this group. But our analysis is that putting more stuff into the police is expanding policing as part of the social services that we're providing in our community. And taking those other, and the police are saying, we're responding to too much. We can't do it all. We can't respond to everything. We don't want to be the first responders for every single type of thing. And yet our solutions societally are often to add more things into and on top of the police and expand that system, while those roles aren't yet decreasing people's access points inside of the criminal legal system. So that's just one analysis that we can talk about. And like, if people in that system disagree, that's okay. The other one is specifically about the way that program functions locally. And that's the part where I can't share like my sources, but I can say that lots of people don't feel like that program is having the effect that it should, including many people in mental health leadership and many people in positions that interact with that program quite a lot. And that from the sort of organizational listening side, that's a recommendation that is coming from the suggestions of people who are not us in some ways, that reducing and not expanding that type of program is something that many people are already talking about and thinking about in the field generally. And so I think it would not be challenging to remove that recommendation necessarily, but it would be challenging to add a recommendation about increasing any kind of social work inside of policing, because the field is moving away from that. The field of social support and mental health is moving away from embedded around here. That's happening here, is moving away from that embeddedness. And a lot of local leadership and social services that we talk to, we're talking more about decoupling as actually increasing safety for people. Decoupling policing from drug supports and addiction supports and mental health supports would actually increase access for a lot of people who do not feel able to access supports that are attached to the police right now. So that's where it comes from. That doesn't mean it's where it has to stay, but those are the threads that have led to that recommendation. And
can I add to that briefly, Shay, too? And I you're right, Maya, too, in that like this is not necessarily it's not a budgetary recommendation for the department because the department doesn't fund, or the town because the town doesn't fund the position, but it is a practice recommendation that we may or may not make as a group or keep as a group. What I want to say, this is, I think, hard but necessary to talk about in this forum, which is that there are a few programs, collaborative programs that are really touted in this community. The police social worker is one, and Project Care is another. And on the surface or on paper, these collaborations appear collaborative and might appear sort of like they're strengthening resources, right, for people affected. The experiences, though, that we are hearing of people who are experiencing those projects is different than what the theory or intention of the project is. And this is where, our agreement of, intention and impact both matter. And it was, we heard a lot from people, not just who experience these projects, but people who work in them and work with them, where it's clear, although there's not good data on either project, I will say, but it feels clear to folks working in these projects that it's not having the impact that it was intended to have. And that's what we're acknowledging, right? The data collection in both projects is limited. And so our project collected people's experiences, right, with these projects, and the intention of like supporting folks more in these ways that people thought up does not appear to be having the impact that they intended to have. And that's a problem, right? How we solve that problem or encourage the town to solve that problem, I think, is what we're discussing here. But it's clear in the findings that the impact is not at matching the intention of these projects.
In such measurable ways as the social workers aren't going to go out alone without police in the current embedded way that they're, you know what I mean? Like, that's a really wonderful intention in a lot of ways to like replace the mental health welfare check people with mental health experts who can like do that instead. That's not what's happening right now, nor is that what most impacted communities are necessarily asking for.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking to people, we had a mental health listening session and got many submissions from people about their experiences. And a lot of folks want to actually break down the idea that experts and authorities who assess things are the perfect person to send into crisis. And actually that increasing community capacity for direct support might be a more useful strategy to, again, slowly lower the amount of carceral supports that are available and slowly up the amount of community-based supports that are available. And so I don't know that for me that I feel like next meeting, if somebody comes back with a really strong argument about that, I'm super open to like hearing it. But my read of the room, the larger room of social support right now is that that's not an effective use of resources for anyone except the party that benefits the most from those presence in any department are the police themselves. Feel like they're learning from those programs sometimes, and maybe there's a benefit there. But I don't know that it is creating the same benefit as was intended, as Emily's saying. But if there's experiences that we haven't heard about that yet, or arguments that we haven't heard about that yet, like I said, that can be shared this meeting or next, and we can be really flexible about that. And if folks have strong feelings about that changing, that's good. That's fine.
I can just really quickly share that in my day-to-day work, I am often wishing that I had an option that was not calling the police. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's COVID right now or what it is, but there just is not one to make sure that my clients are safe. And I wish I could call the police social worker and like feel like that was a different thing, but it has not necessarily been my experience. So, you know, I don't disagree, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I don't think those alternatives are going to show up tomorrow, but I think that we could say it is the rudder, the directional goal of our project, that maybe we build up some like peer run or otherwise non-coercive mobile response units like exist in a bunch of cities around the country that are able to do like the work of outreach or welfare checks or whatever in a different way than police do that. And I don't think that can switch like tomorrow, but this police social worker is not doing welfare checks right now, really. So that doesn't impact that. If that goes away slowly and this other thing gets built up slowly, I don't know that there's going to be an interruption in the vital service of like immediate support. I know that the immediate support that's offered right now is harming a lot of people. So I have an interest in stopping harm as we continue, but.
Just want to speak to Kaz's comment in the chat about voluntary mental health services loving the idea of a freak out space and reservations about specifying the non-coercive supports be only peer run. I agree with that and your continued, comments about it. And I think that it's not necessary to specify that, necessarily.
Thanks. I want to make sure that we specify something. But it doesn't have to be that.
Yeah, and Pathways, I know, has like sort of expanded their definition of like what a peer is to include people with lived experiences of like any marginalization, and like that could be one strategy. But like if we're just making these recommendations, we're not then also like specifying like what like what organizational structure, what definitions people use. So yeah, I don't know what wording to use exactly. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. Annalise, did you want to share?
Yeah, while we're talking about the sort of collaborative police and other organizations, I know that this is under the Windham County Sheriff's Office, but I would love to see something in here recommending removing the police officer from schools, and whether that's just supporting I can't remember the name of the organization that's really, starting to get up and running in Vermont, trying to do that across the state that we talked about a few meetings ago, whether that's just like putting them out there or however we do it. I think that's like pretty important and something we heard quite a bit about in some listening sessions. And then one other thing that I've been thinking about is like the way that we talk about police in the community through the types of press releases and what they make available to the press as information. And, so if you look at the police blotter, it's all stuff that's like, here are great things that the police did, and here are the bad people who did these things, which there's a big movement in big movement is maybe overstating it. There's a movement in journalism right now to change that and to report differently. I mean, you can only report on the information the police give you. So maybe that's an open-ended sort of question about requiring more context or not providing names or showing use of force stats for the week, like anything that changes the way that we're like saying hero police and vicious criminals in the police blotter in terms of like what the police public relations is creating.
I just want to quickly say I have big feelings about press releases, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that until you brought it up, Annalise. I think that's really great information and input. Thank you.
It's also essentially free for them.
I see a stack of hands, and I don't know who went first. I'm sorry. I've been doing a terrible job of keeping stack. Laura, Maya, and Gary are on the stack.
Gary's been up for a while, and we have been focusing, and Bob, and focusing on.
No, that's fine. You guys, I want you guys to elaborate more. I can cut in later before coffee break again.
Yeah, we can do a public comment. We'll make some space for public comment. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, Laura, did you want to?
Yeah, my next question was about if you could say more about the community control and determination of town resources. It's in the recommendation for increasing accountability, and just sort of what was meant by that.
Shay, remind me if I'm correct on this, but I actually think that was supposed to come out.
It was, definitely.
Yeah, that was supposed to come out. And we do, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about the thoughts on community control or how we want to say. But I can say
something about that. Emily left it, and there's a placeholder for us to discuss in one of our earlier discussions, because there's great debate about this concept of community control of the police right now in the world. And as I understand it, the two kind of sides of that debate are like, we should have, accountability bodies that externally review the police and have more teeth in like being able to make firing decisions, and like, a truthful community body that's elected that has some accountability role with the police. And then the other side of that is there has been push for that for 50 years and one has never existed. That police contracts are really strong, that there's like personnel issues that can't be public, that there's all these barriers to like doing that effectively, and that we haven't yet seen one. And while a lot of people, including like anti-racist people and some abolitionists, really want that kind of body, many requests for that are watered down enough that doesn't end up increasing accountability. And frankly, even though we love the humans of the CPCC who are here tonight and have loved a lot of what they've said, that body in our review of documents and what those folks share is that that's not an accountability system about policing generally or their policies or procedures. That's a liaison program between one complainant and the department that's kind of handling like the public relations of that, mediating that as if it's a 50-50 experience, and sometimes even doing investigation about like what the reputations are of these officers or people that doesn't have any procedure or methodology attached to it. So the CPCC is functioning in some ways to like go between the police and a specific complainant with mixed experience. Some of those complaints last years long. None of those complaints have ever challenged the police's perspective about something.
Not in the last 2 years that we reviewed.
There's not been a single challenge when somebody's like, I'm bringing something and I want change. That's not actually what's occurring there. So what we've also heard from community members who were around for the foundation of that was that they were asking for a community control accountability board with teeth. And what we got was a CPCC, which didn't do that. It did something else. It like functions to like be in some ways a liaison between a single complainant and the police, but it doesn't do that. So some people—
And can I just add there, Shay, that
those accountability bodies at all, if they're not actually going to be able to do what they want, and if it's just going to make it seem like on the surface there's more accountability. And some people think it's a great idea for marginalized people to be elected to do that. Some people say we should pay those people. Other people say that adds more funding to the police, right? There's like all kinds of dialogue in there about what could be. Other folks say the actual way you get accountability from any large institution is by impacting the budget when people do things that are violating. So like, what would it look like to cap pensions if people are found of using excessive force, or like cut off people's pensions, or like not pay people to be on administrative leave after they shoot somebody, or other kinds of like budgetary accountability mechanisms is another strategy. And we added some of those in there as options. I don't feel committed to any of those as the one way, but I think they're in there just as like ideas for you all to think about. Maybe by next meeting, we can have some more digested ideas about what mechanisms of accountability, or how would we even get to mechanisms of accountability when that's really a challenge.
Yeah. And I just want to add with the CPCC, especially, this is not actually this is not a challenge that is unique in Brattleboro on any level, and the call for accountability that led to the CPCC, that led to that body becoming more of a liaison between the police and the community complainants, that process, that sort of cultural process is actually quite common in police oversight or citizen review committees, right? And so we're trying to recognize that this idea of community control or oversight of the police is formidably challenging to actually achieve, right? And that's not at all unique to Brattleboro.
Can I just quickly say, just one more, add into Shay, like you gave the example of no more paid administrative leave. I would like to add it when officers are charged with domestic assault charges, no more paid administrative leave. I got to throw that out there. I would definitely like to see more accountability and transparency when even just charges are pressed related to work that you're supposed to be in service to. Very, very needs some change there.
Right. And that's domestic violence and racial bias, right? Those are the two areas that are really challenging on a national scale about accountability. And some folks also recommend as a mechanism automatizing firing in the policy, so that it's not a discretionary, like, I'm going to make a decision about this one person and their one domestic and like whether or not that actually whatever, but saying like, this is our policy that like, if there's certain kinds of violations that happen, we're not going to rehire that person, or we're going to fire that person, or we're going to cap pay. Those are sort of other suggested mechanisms of accountability that exist out in the world. And I think, to me, it makes a lot of sense on a systemic level that like mechanizing those things creates accountability. And I also, in this whole process, I've tried to be so hold so much integrity with what I'm hearing from people about the harm they're experiencing, and like understanding that not that the powers that be may not like approve of every single one of these things that I hear from people, that would be helpful. But I don't know like how much traction y'all feel like that might have in this community, and we can talk about it next meeting. Perhaps you can look at some of those things, that document that Kaz sent, as well as the document that we are talking about right now, as well as do your own research about police accountability. But accountability is needed and very challenging because of the power dynamics of the institution. And we can't solve it all, and it shouldn't be our job to solve it all, because in no job that I've ever had is it somebody else's job to solve the organizational and accountability challenges inside of my organization and tell me how to do my work, right? That's not actually our job to solve the whole thing, but we can make directional suggestions for the people whose job that is to do it.
Bob, Maya, I'm not sure who was first there, but.
I just didn't unraise my hand. I'm good.
Did Maya want to go, or?
Nope, she's all set. It sounds like. Go for it.
So, couple things I just wanted to make sure that we didn't forget. And going back to Kaz's comment in the chat, picking up about 2/3 of the way through, there are other issues as well with the peer workforce, such as a co-optation of social movements and use of peers as underpaid workers, replacing higher paid union jobs. And he says, I'm willing to talk about that further. I wanted to highlight that statement. I wanted to go back to history in the 1960s when deinstitutionalization came about in the psychiatric institutions. And the promise was that then those savings would go to community mental health centers, and that never happened. And that created some of, well, it was a contributing factor to a lot of things that we're seeing now. But I think Kaz's point is to be given a highlight in this discussion. I want to take Kaz's comment and a comment that Chief Fitzgerald made the other day at the select board meeting and put them both in the scale together. Fitzgerald seemed to be acknowledging the possibility of an alternative mechanism for dealing with some calls. And then he said, but how would that organization be held accountable? And so there is that sort of tension between, and I don't know who said it here, about I would love to be, I think it was Maya, I would love to be able to call someone, but I call the police. So holding those two things together and holding that issue of accountability together. So I want to say that. Then going back to the police discipline thing for one moment, I see Tara's on the chat about some of the history behind what happened before we got to the CPCC. I hope that some of that information gets highlighted in the report, because I think history can be instructive. Maybe it's because I'm old, I'm looking at history. But on the police discipline issue, you may have seen the recent reports in the Digger. I think they were called the Scarlet Letter, and they're talking about the Brady letters and in New Hampshire, the Laurie's list of individuals who are on the force who prosecutors have looked at and said, I really can't trust testimony from this individual because of XYZ complaint that has occurred. And this is the documentation that the prosecutor is then handing over to defense counsel. a very disjointed system at this point. And it's probably not an issue for Brattleboro per se, but it's an issue probably for the state legislature to deal with in terms of what do you do with people who have Brady letters? Or because of our proximity to New Hampshire, maybe being on a lorry list before I quit that job and came over to Vermont. That's my comment. Oh, I'm mute on the phone.
Great points, Bob. Thank you so much for bringing that up, and really demonstrates the level of protection, and non-accountability that we see in some of those systems, right? And the point, the comment that Chief Fitzgerald made a couple of times in last night's, was that last night? That was last night, right?
2 nights ago, right? No, last night.
Today's Wednesday.
It was last night. We were there together.
Comments, about if we do have alternatives to some types of calls. Great question came up that he brought up, which is who makes that assessment. That is a discussion that absolutely needs to happen. A community-wide discussion needs to happen. And there's precedent set for that in different communities that we can look at. Not we in the next week, but we as a community. But also this piece around how are they going to be held accountable? I would like to see that question turned in the mirror a little bit as well, or a lot, right? And so this question of accountability is a very important one, right? And if we were to support and develop alternatives to the police for certain types of needs in our community, my hope is that there would be accountability embedded into those systems and structures as well. And the reality is the framework of the good work and the good service that the police do is also very much lacking in accountability, right? When the police are now the current system responding to those calls, right? And that's a finding that we're centering as well. So yes, more and more and more accountability, please, all around. So I appreciate that. Yeah, do you want to respond?
Can I just jump back in and add something to that? And when I say accountability, and I can't find this on the internet, it must be too old for the internet, but there were professors, Gendro and Ross, way back when, and they said that when you assess a program, is it adequately funded? Mm-hmm. Is it adequately staffed? Is it doing what it said it was setting out to do? Mm-hmm. And if you answer yes to those questions, then I think you have an accountable organization. Mm-hmm. But to take a piece of business and turn it over, but don't answer those 3 questions, mm-hmm. then that's not accountable. So I would look at accountability that way, that if we have a mechanism, that mechanism be adequately staffed, adequately funded, and is doing what it's set out to do.
I would add that that's not the only bit of accountability, because the police can be setting out to do something that is different than what the community actually wants them to do, which is happening right now. That the police may be setting out to do one goal, but we also have to be measuring that goal with the people that we're doing that service for. And right now, in mental health welfare checks specifically, some harm is happening as a casualty of the way that system is currently designed. One could argue that the police are sufficiently funded, staffed, and are doing what they set out to do about mental health welfare checks. It's not working. Mm-hmm. It's not working for some of the people who are receiving that service, who are being coerced into giving information under false pretenses, who are forced to have police contact when in just emotional distress, who go in for voluntary support and that support immediately turns involuntary, even if they just want to walk home due to police contact, who are sometimes assaulted mm-hmm. and with use of force in those contexts. And so there's a little bit more to accountability than just that for me around the police. And we don't have that in our current system. So mm-hmm. to say, if we transfer this over to somebody else, how are they going to be held accountable is a fine question, but it's still not acknowledging the harm, which is the first step in accountability. Mm-hmm. If you're in any kind of relationship and the harm's not going acknowledged, you're not going to be able to change it. You can't change something that we don't address, acknowledge. So there's a lot to the accountability question, and I would love for us to speak more about it next week.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say, I took those comments about accountability. I think both Chief Fitzgerald and Captain Kerrigan made similar comments. And again, this is through my lens, but I took them to be talking about the accountability of who makes the determination of, what service gets dispatched.
Mm-hmm.
And if, the wrong service is sent, who's accountable for that? And, of course, I've brought that up as a concern of mine as a survivor. Mm-hmm. Like, I need the police to get to me as fast as possible in my situation, and how to reckon with that possible time delay or sending the wrong response. So I took them to be referencing that. Mm-hmm. That mm-hmm. could be just because that's my lens, or maybe that was what they were speaking to. They didn't go into specific detail. And to me, that was maybe a different conversation, different point than the broader accountability mm-hmm. embedded within whatever services, right? So I just wanted to name that. And I do want to say about last night, I felt, after listening to that, I felt pretty optimistic in comparison to their presentation last month, in terms of they seem to be really in agreement with what I think this conversation is and community is saying around mental health. From what I'm taking of it, that to me, it seems as though that particular area, there would potentially be the least amount of resistance, mm-hmm. which, I don't know what that will look like, but I think that's good. That seems mm-hmm. to be what I'm hearing. Yeah. And again, I did feel encouraged, especially with Captain Kerrigan sort of speaking of wanting to move toward change, and even recognizing, I think he even said, implicit bias that mm-hmm. may exist within our department. And I know that's just a small step, but mm-hmm. it's encouraging to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did hear the accountability piece, as you did too, in part. And I think that we'll need to include that to some degree in our report, right? Like, as we can, the development of alternatives is not going to happen by the time the fiscal year 22 budget is right. Like, this is at the end of the document that you're looking at right now. I just put a little like fiscal year 2022, 23, 24, 25, because some of these, I want to be really clear about which recommendations we're making for the next 4 weeks, right? Which is the process, the time frame of finalizing the fiscal year 2022 budget. And then what we're actually talking about is a bigger vision or longer term process, right? And the development of alternatives is going to be more in that longer term vision, right? And I think the question of how those decisions get made that came up last night, and that you've brought up, Kelsey, too, I think that's a critical piece of this work, not this work that we're doing in this moment, but this bigger vision work. Like, that's going to be a big critical step, right, of determination from the community about if and when we're able to develop alternatives, how do we navigate that system so that harm and risk are both minimized and reduced.
And there's lots of models for that. There's like some that go through dispatch. There's some options that are explicitly there without, so that someone doesn't have to call through dispatch, especially for voluntary support about things. There's benefit, pros and cons to having some of that available through dispatch. There's a lot of benefit and support too of people who are like, I cannot use voluntary support that is attached to police in any way to be outside of dispatch. And I don't think that we can solve all of that now, because community organizations are going to have to be part of like the decision of like who's going to be willing to take up what. But I can say that a lot of those conversations are already happening, already in development amongst many social service organizations. And I think that us making these, like, as was in the design, short-term recommendations about the budget or policy right now, and longer term, long arc decisions of like, we need alternatives for the people who can't access what's there, but we're not going to figure it out in 3 months, but maybe we could put some effort to having that figured out by 2024. We're still here by then, or 2025. That might be really helpful. So that could be another thing that you all, if you have feelings about it, kind of can do with this document between now and next week, might be to like categorize in your own mind or on that document for yourself where some of those things belong to you. and, strike the ones that are abominable and highlight the ones that are the most important or something, and like put it in a approximate time frame, and we can go back and forth about that together.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should potentially take either a break or public comment or both somehow. Not at the same time, but like maybe one after the other in either direction.
I wonder, do we feel like we need a break if we're going to break in 20 minutes? How do folks feel? Folks can, folks can take maybe their own breaks. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel good with powering through.
Okay.
My end.
But I like the idea of doing something. Okay. I was going to say, I like the idea of doing something a little unconventional, leaving more than -2 minutes for public comment.
Let's take them.
Yeah, Gary, we want to hear from you.
Wow, I am just hearing this power meeting. I am loving it. It was very good talks last night, Shay, select board. And I tell you guys were awesome. You really summed it up. What I like the most about what you two spoke about, you're leading the way for the next generations to come in and pick up the mantle as well. That really said a lot, because you're leaving also room for improvement on other things, because we don't know what the future down the road, once we, become old and gray and, we're in the mountains or whatever. But it says a lot, and you expounding on that meant a lot. I mean, also the way you were bringing to the attention of how these things should be handled. And also when we had our meeting about the CPCC, that was very powerful. Being a man, not only of color, but a single dad, also being a member on many of the committees too, bringing into light also how my experiences are too, and what I see and how I feel on a lot of these committees and what goes on in town means a lot to me. And also, my daughter coming into town and everything, she experiences the same stuff too, even in school. So this is a precedent, and I appreciate you guys. Even Mel Motel on Costa, she's helped me out a lot. Cassandra too, and everything. Also with the CPC, you gave me a lot of good ideas and thoughts. Like I said, I need to really absorb this, digest this some more, so I could probably come up with some thoughts and email it to you. I also sent you some things about Burlington, how they're doing their police. Did you see how now they want to be in charge of how the police being hiring and firing? I sent that to your proton, and I said I didn't know if that was something that you incorporated it also, if that's a thought, that type of process. And how would that mechanism work? Or is that something that Brattleboro is ready for or willing to step forward, and for the police to acknowledge too that we should be a part of also, doing interviews with the police, and if they're being held accountable, like you said, not just alone that they should be not getting paid, but also you should be able, just like in school, hiring and firing a teacher. I was on the PTA. So you should be able to have that comfort zone to open up that kind of a dialogue and information to speak, to see what their thoughts are. It's just something that you're presenting. Because I last night, I think when you guys left, January is going to be busy for our team. Peter says there's going to be a lot that's going to be talked about. Some surveys are going to be coming out for those who couldn't stay on long. Also, there are going to be some other recommendations. And I think on the 7th, they're going to have Human Services too, talking about the grants and the budgets. We're going to be on there talking about how it was dispersed also. So you might want to attend that to get some informational stuff on how these monies were sent out. Because I see it was on one of your minutes that you were asking questions. That way, Ain and I could also expound on that. But I also wanted to thank Kelsey. I seen you on WCAX. Awesome job. I kudos to that. We have to raise awareness in Southern Vermont as well too.
Wow, Gary, you're the first person that's mentioned that to me. So thank you so much.
I'm on everything, MSNBC, CNN. I'm going to get a big, I got everything on the big screen. I'm watching all that. Waiting for a stimulus package. So my daughter got me on Amazon. So I want all of these, Dad. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it really meant a lot. I did want to get together maybe before the next meeting in January. Select Board said they're going to meet every Tuesday for 4 weeks. So there's going to be a lot going on before March 2nd, and just ask more questions about with CPCC, because my thought was back when 2014, when they started, it was a different time.
Mhm.
And now that with this time, you have to make some type of change. We can't use the same,
Mhm.
you know what I mean, format, as they say. You have to upgrade. So I was thinking the same thing in that sense. I wanted to get some of my other comrades aboard on this, but they have other priorities that are ensuing them at the particular time. So that's why I wanted to meet with you guys and get some feedback also on that. Because like you said, you're going to be bringing that, I guess, to the RTM, Shay and Emily. Is that going to be going to RTM? This particular
We're going to bring it to the, we're going to bring it, we're going to submit it to the town.
Yes.
And the select board. And I really appreciate everything that you're saying, Gary. And I just want to say, I've so appreciated your interest and participation and your ideas and your positivity. I feel so grateful for your presence in our community and the work that you're showing up for, and showing folks how to show up for the work,
And I just want to get this because by next year, I want to get this up and running once, we get this all going, because I don't know if they put it up, you'll probably see it when it goes on BCTV about, there's going to be a couple proposals presented, several surveys you might want to check out. I think you guys stepped off right after you were done, but yeah, it's something like this. I really want to get in touch, but your next meeting is what, the 20?
So our next meeting is the 28th. I will actually be, that's correct, right? I will be joining your meeting, the CPCC, right before it.
Oh, I wanted to tell you, that's canceled.
Okay.
Because we're trying to locate an individual. That's another thing, part of the CPCC, which you guys expounded upon. Sometimes it's hard to either track the person, find the, or this miscommunication, and then how do they notify them?
Right.
There's that also, that gray area. So there's a lot of things that need to be critiqued.
Yep.
Fixed, a lot of things that need to be done. And then we have to catch up to these times, because we have to pass this on.
Yeah.
To the next, and our kids are going to look at us. What did you do?
Right.
What difference did you make? It's just like the 70s when the countercultural movement. Well, this is a whole new movement to get equality and get people on the right track of harmony and working together as one and being a collective and getting this town up and going, because, we're going to have to be that example, not just for this generation, but generations to come.
Totally. And I want to acknowledge also what you said. I'm super glad you brought it up, because I forgot to, but to let the committee know, last night at the select board meeting, Shay and I inquired to the board about, our main inquiry was, they have now since had 2 meetings with the police department about the fiscal year 2022 budget and their policies and practices. And in both meetings, I attended and said, we these items are also in our review, and we asked them to sort of recommit logistically to what their commitment is to centering the voices of those most impacted that we've been working so diligently to gather. And so it is, I guess, on the 5th, it will be the Human Services Committee and us. Our report, right? So I want to let the committee know here that you are more than welcome and encouraged to join us at that meeting on the 5th, and highly likely, and this was acknowledged as well by the select board themselves, that will not be the end of the conversation about this report, right? So I'm personally planning to be available those four Tuesdays in January.
Yeah, I'll definitely remind you guys. I'll send it to Proton.
Yeah, I know you will.
Well, he said, basically, Peter said that this is really going to be really busy. It's going to be really bombarded with a lot of stuff. And any district leaders that are on here and anyone else, you're going to really want to see the next 4 meetings and be there for the whole duration. I mean, it was short yesterday. We got about 9:04. So it wasn't until 11:30 like normally. So yeah, but there's a lot that's going to be presented. He wants to push it before March 2nd. And I think, do we get our books? I think February, the book, the budget.
I'm not sure, Gary. I'm gonna ask us to move on for a moment, because we have just 10 more minutes, and I want to see if there's any other.
Okay, absolutely. But yeah, I'll definitely keep in touch. But thank you, guys. Keep up the good fight.
Thanks. Thank you. You too.
I just want to make one comment about that, which is that we need to actually check in with Peter about like what happens to this committee as a body.
Right.
When like the deadline is over, like, do we still need to warn things as a joint meeting and like function as a committee after that? I don't think that that's like currently the structural plan. So I think potentially that might free us all up after the first to be able to like not have to warn talking to each other or whatever potentially. So I will get some more clarification about like how those meetings we would need to function within those kind of meetings. And we'll communicate that with you before then. But I just wanted to say that before we moved on, because so far, if we wanted to meet with any other committee, we have to warn it, and then we'd have to have a quorum of our members there in order to be present for it, and like blah, blah, blah. And we'll see about that. Mostly on the 5th, it'll probably be, they'll have the documents and we will do some presentation. I've suggested that they're going to need more presentation time from us, partly because not only have the last 2 meetings with the police been about policies and procedures, but I think that they've essentially, this is happening across the nation, been a defense of the institution and like the general spirit of what their work is, right? And that's fine. And also like there are other stories and other narratives that really need to be uplifted during this time. That's the whole point of people bringing this process to light, was we need other voices to also be in that conversation. And we're hoping that we can do a good enough job of highlighting some of those other voices in this process. But we're going to need time to share those experiences and thoughts with the select board.
Yeah, and I just want to note, Kelsey saying in the chat, are we going to think about all attending the 1-5 select board meeting? It is, I think we need to get Shay's clarity that she's speaking about to determine like what that looks like technically, if all of us going in a quorum means that we're technically in a committee meeting. But if the committee disbands the 31st, either way, I think it would be great for everybody, or as many as people as can from the committee will attend that meeting. But we just have to get some clarity about what that, what that actually technically looks like. I don't think either is prohibitive for the whole committee to attend. We just have to get a sense of that. That's a good point. But yeah, I would love for folks to be there for sure. Yeah, thank you.
I also want to acknowledge Tara's comments in the chat. There's a lot happening in the chat actually, and we've made a commitment to read some of that out. And Tara said so much work went into the formation of the CPCC, and I would hate for all that hard work and coming forth of so many of our community members to follow the same route. And how do we ensure the next select board will not prioritize that? And I think those are great questions. And Tara, you can speak now, or we can also talk more privately about the history of that, project. I know that in for some people in the community that I've heard from, that process was quite disappointing in a lot of ways, and that the teeth were never there that folks had hoped for. And yeah, I hear that.
And is there any other community participation? Anyone else want to join into the conversation? All righty.
Can I say something? I'm shocked that there has been not a mention of the one recommendation, which I think might be the hardest for our community to grapple with personally, which is the common sense Brattleboro's safer policing suggestion. We don't have to do it. It's there for us to think about disarming the police for certain tasks, particularly most easily public speaking engagements, going into schools, meetings, tasks where the rest of us would not necessarily be armed for doing a similar type of work. That safer policing policy also suggests some specific recommendations, which you guys have heard from them a couple of times, about specific ways of doing that reduction in the constants of firearms in policing. And and we get to talk about it. That's that. I, again, don't want to say that that's like what we need to do, but that's just like, maybe that next week, I would really like to hear from you all about the recommendations and what you think about each of them. And if you need more information about some of those things, you can definitely email us and we can talk more about, I think we can talk more about our detailed findings in an individual way that doesn't constitute like the way that we would all be having a conversation together. But if you have a specific question, email or check in with us about those things. And I do want to say that, you know, this work has really been challenging in a lot of ways. And one of the challenges is that what is convenient and easy is not what matches the experiences of some of our most marginalized and vulnerable community members who really need us to belong to the stories they've shared with us about needing some change to happen to reduce the harm in some of the ways that we intervene in our community. And some of that change is going to be outside of this process and just is like a cultural change that needs to happen. And we each get to leave this process and go do our work in that way. I'm going to keep teaching about consent and healthy relationships and gender and boundaries and, you know, healthy relationships. And we're going to all, you know, keep doing the restorative justice work that we're doing and doing the work about abuse that we're doing and doing the cultural change work around calling the police that we're doing. And whatever we're doing, we all get to have our role in this long arc shift of how we take care of each other. But you know, for this piece of work, what we have is a cursory but fairly amazingly large, deep study of how especially marginalized members of our community have experienced these systems, and also somewhat of how lots of people experience them. A cursory but kind of amazing study of like how social service organizations feel about their relationship to each other and how that system is flowing or not, and what might be points of leverage or strengths there to continue. And then data about how police is happening in Brattleboro, and then our recommendations. That's the meat and potatoes of what's happening. And most of that, like the big stuff, is in these key findings. Mm-hmm. Racism is happening. Mm-hmm. It's measurable. Mm-hmm. We have to address it. Mental health interventions are causing at least significant some harm to at least some people in reducing their access and causing trauma in the meantime. And we have a responsibility to make recommendations to reduce some of that harm. People's basic needs getting met creates safety. People mm-hmm. being housed and fed and getting like places of love and connection in neighborhoods and learning skills to take care of each other and themselves helps people be safer. Mm-hmm. That's what people who are the most vulnerable in our community want for safety. So we're going to be highlighting that listening and those themes. And also, I'm so grateful for you all giving feedback about these specific mm-hmm. recommendations, because that's the most intense part of the work and the most, inconvenient part of change is like bucking up against the status quo and making requests mm-hmm. for change and pushing for change. And I think there's a lot of support for the types of change that we're making. A lot of people have named that they feel afraid to share, even professionals, some of the change they want, because they don't want to jeopardize the relationship between their clients and the only people who are currently there to respond in emergencies, for example. But I think that there's support for a lot of what we're talking about amongst the people who are the most knowledgeable about this stuff. And if not, you guys are part of your role is to hold us accountable to like know what you know from your lived experience and your seats. But I hope that we're doing everybody justice in the completion of this task, and we'll share as much as we can with you in our next meeting, and you can share back with us mm-hmm. your reflections about the recommendations specifically.
And I just want to add to that briefly, Shay, before we end. Thank you so much for all you've shared. And I think one of the areas I was surprised didn't come up more, maybe it's just because that's at the end of the document, so we can only get so far, is some of the findings and recommendations around reducing police presence. And I think that, reckoning with this finding, which is not news to me at any level, but reckoning with this finding that people most impacted by the police and policing want less police presence in their lives, not more, right? And that's the general theme. That's the general finding, right? Where there's also those who experience the need for targeted and specific police presence in their life, and also acknowledged. But that the trend towards community policing, the trend towards more police presence in more of our community life, is in direct opposition to this finding, right? That those most impacted, those who have fear and trauma and PTSD responses and terror and have experienced harm from this modality, right? That it doesn't feel safe to have children, to have their children in schools where there's cops visiting those schools, or it doesn't feel safe to have social activities with police officers present, right? And so community policing is a whole philosophy of policing that has kind of dominated policing in the last 20 years in a lot of ways. And it's something that we have to reckon with. You know, it's actually part of the police officer's quota to attend community engagement events, right? And schools are specifically named as a place to meet that quota, right? So it's a philosophy that, again, well-intentioned, right? I think very well-intentioned in a lot of ways, but the impact is not matching the intention. Those most impacted.
The impact is that
right.
All BIPOC youth that shared with us named that police in their schools make them feel less safe.
Yeah.
Everyone. And that all queer and trans people that shared almost exclusively named that, you know, finding coffee with a cop at the coffee shop does not actually necessarily increase the safety and community. That what increases safety is acknowledging the harm and working to reduce that harm.
Right.
That's what builds better relationships. And that's what our recommendations are incredibly targeted. They're not like 30% reduction, slap it on there. A lot of communities are doing that, no shade. But I hear from Brattleboro Police, it's a small department. There's a minimum number of officers they feel like they need at a time to respond to things. And we are listening to how they're using their time and what are the effectiveness of the ways that they're using their time and trying to make specific recommendations that match this community.
Mm-hmm.
And take care of the most vulnerable people in this community. Mm-hmm. So take a look at the recommendations, talk more next time. We're going to keep plugging away at filling in the rest of the report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and feel free to ask us questions in the meantime if needed. Yeah. Bob? You're still muted. I think I might be able to unmute you. No. Okay.
So following the way the select board works, is there a way, our next meeting is the 28th. Mm-hmm. So at what point you have the report or the draft report that we would review by the 28th, and could you then send a copy of that report along with the meeting agenda for the 28th prior to the 28th during the warning period? So it'd be, let's say, Monday meetings would be a Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
That would be
it's pretty much already, yeah, because of the holiday. Yeah, we are not going to be able to get you a draft of the full report before it's due. And I think maybe we have different perspectives on this, but this document that we sent you today as the key findings, backed by, the rest of the document is contextual, right? Like framing, like the national context and how Brattleboro got here to this point, and the data, like description. I mean, it's going to be many, many, many pages of the data that we've effectively shared with you in many different formats. There will be content that's, we didn't specifically share as we've scrubbed through the police data or the listening experiences. But the rest of the document will be the sort of technical pieces behind the key findings, which are already there. It's just a formatting, getting it in and getting it in the format we need it in. So I'm sorry that we were not able to get you a full draft. I'm not going to be able to get you a full draft of the full report before it's submitted. And, Shay and I were, as the facilitators, this is not fully a committee process, right? There's two hired facilitators that, the amount of time in the committee process and the amount of time that we've spent actually, moving through the content and analyzing it and getting it into the report isn't, hasn't been able to fit in such a way that we've been able to actually provide a full draft report before it's due.
I also think that that's slightly by design. I just want to say that the design that we've shared many times is like, we share with you the questions and work we're doing. You give us feedback. We take it back and we do the work. We bring you what we can and share, and you give us directional accountability, support around these ideas, and we go back and do the work. And we've been doing that process back and forth. And I think, that's to the very end. And I think I don't know that it's complicated, and I'm open to feedback, but I feel like this is the space where we're saying, this is what we found. We cannot do a 50-page report by committee. I'm not interested in us having an editing process line by line, 9 people, when we've had since October 7th was our first meeting to December 31st at the end to do grammatical edits or anything else like that all together. So what can we collaborate on is the big themes and the big meat and the big messages and most importantly, the recommendations that we're saying, this is the space where we're bringing that back to you. You can share your very valuable thoughts and feelings, and they are going to impact what happens. They are impacting what happens, and we are making the happenings behind the scenes a lot. And so I hope that our next week's conversation about recommendations can be a big space for you all to have that directional voice in what occurs. And the key findings that are here is the summary of everything else that's in there, essentially.
I feel so confident in the work that you guys are doing, and thank you. And I feel like the process is working, and I feel like you've been transparent about what the process is. So sorry, Kelsey, I see you were going to go at the same time.
No, it's okay. I guess I just want to say that, again, I really respect and appreciate all the work you've put into this. I think I'm also, I could be wrong, Bob, but I think I'm also aligned with Bob that, if there's a time where the select board asks, were the committee members part of, without having a chance to see the analysis, and sort of put that against the recommendations and be able to be part of that. I understand why we haven't been able to. I don't think that we can actually say, right? We've been here to hold the discussion with you every week and hold space and be present, but we haven't really, been part of formulating the recommendation, I think, as the final product. But I'm not saying, I understand how that's come together, right? So I guess, I don't know. I just want to say that.
I think that one of the things that, oh gosh, I'm freezing up. Can you hear me? I think that one of the things that makes me think about is just how important it feels to me to go to those select board meetings and just say, I was part of this committee, and based on what I did see in the data and what I heard from all the meetings, I still feel really strongly about these recommendations. Because I do hear what you're saying, Kelsey and Bob, and I think that I also do feel like I see the data from the stuff we looked at last week, in these recommendations, and I see information that I've heard from the listening sessions for sure, without actually seeing the 40 pages of quotes too. But yeah, I feel like another way that my voice can be heard is actually being in the select board meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to note, Kaz is headed out and we're ending up our meeting. I just want to name a couple of things in the chat. Gary asked about wondering if we can ask the BPD why they drop in applicants applying for BPD around Vermont. This is a great point. They shared last night in the meeting that departments everywhere, and specifically around the whole state of Vermont, are unable to fill their positions. And our department has had anywhere between, it sounds like, it's a handful of positions open chronically for a number of years and hard to fill. And, I think it could be further inquiry. I don't know that we have time to do that inquiry in this review, but I think that there's a cultural phenomenon happening, actually, a national phenomenon happening where it's hard to fill police officer positions, which to me demonstrates a little bit more around like the need for alternatives, right? The need for alternative types of jobs and positions that can serve folks. But thanks for bringing that up, Gary. And yeah, Kelsey and Lana are saying they'll be sharing thoughts, which is awesome. Tara says the BIPOC caucus is meeting on the 28th, and so there might not be anyone from the route to join us. Thanks for letting us know, and thanks for continuing your meeting space. Yeah, and Tara saying it can be in fact impactful if folks other than Shay and Emily speak to your work. Thank you. Yeah, and I don't, I think being really transparent about what you feel, about how this process unfolded and about the committee role, my sense is that we've been transparent that the committee wasn't going to be actually in the writing of the report process. My sense is that we were transparent in saying that. And that's just my experience. You know what I mean? Like, I honor your experience too, Bob and Kelsey and others. And I'm super grateful for your work and your role in reflecting back to us and holding accountable. And I do encourage you to let us know in the next meeting, like what specific recommendations, a large part, we put these recommendations in this report today because we needed to sort of direct the conversation and move things, because we only had 2 hours. So please don't take that as just all that can be in there. We really want to hear from you and your experiences as well.
And ask questions about the information that informs any what you have questions about, because we can answer that to the best of our ability. We can't share the raw data with you because it's secret, and balancing the protection of people's stories who have legitimate fear of recourse versus the emotional impact that would be so helpful in being able to share these stories with the world is a painful balance for me to hold. But that's like, for my part of it, that's where it's at. I cannot share with you anything but what I can share with the entire world in this space.
Right.
And I have to be really careful about that. But I think that would mean that we had like a week to do the report after all of the data stopped coming in.
Right.
And it's already 50 pages long. So that's really unreasonable. We're already doing so much more work than could ever happen, which is why we designed this process to be Emily and I writing the report and then bringing it back for some conversation, because there's just too much work to be able to do in committee.
Yeah.
But I'm really grateful for that feedback. And I think as more phases of this work unfold, whether any individual of us are in that or not, it's helpful to like glean these lessons and be transparent and open about our experience of that, because it will not only inform this work and how it's received, but like all continuing work in this vein. We did this process in a new way. Like a group of organizers came together and pushed this thing, and committee members got paid, and there's lots of precedents being set, and it's very different. Successes and failures, and we will document them all, and then we will like hopefully pass that document on to the next people and be like, this is what we would do the same way. This is what we would do differently. It was too short. Everybody needs more money. Like, there's a million things I'd like to do differently, but here we are. And
feel free to put that feedback in the survey, because that will be in the report as well. Some of that, so that it can be lessons learned for future organizing activities too around this.
Thank you all.
All right, let's adjourn our meeting for tonight and enjoy the next few days. And we'll be seeing each other again shortly, the 28th.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.